Okay, page 2 of the purchase contract, starting with section B, initial earnest money deposit. Okay, so by now you've talked to your client about what type of a down payment they're going to put down. So let's say you have a buyer who is going to be getting a loan and they're going to be putting down 20%. This sample purchase contract is based on a 20% down, $1 million offer price with 20% down. You'll want to ask your client how much they want to put down on the initial deposit. So the 20% that you're putting down is going to get split up into two deposits. One is going to be the initial deposit, the second would be the additional deposit, and then of course the balance would be at closing. So in this tutorial, we're going to use a standard of $5,000. You don't have to do $5,000. It could be $1,000. It could be $10,000. It doesn't matter. It's whatever the buyer wants to do. But by representing a buyer, you want to try to help them with making their offer strong. So 5,000 is a good amount to put down on $1 million property, and that would be considered relatively strong. And if you wanted it to be stronger, you could advise your client maybe put down 10,000, but it's again whatever the buyer is comfortable doing or obviously has in the bank. The received from line here, obviously if you have a client, his name is not going to be Barry Buyer. So as a reminder, just make sure that you don't put whatever's in this sample on your contract. You're going to need to actually type out your client's name. And I know that sounds silly, but I've seen people do it, so be careful. Anyway, so you'll put your client's name here, however it appears on their check. And then on the next line, you're going to put down the actual amount of their initial deposit. So in this case, it's $5,000. And what the form or how they're getting the money. Is it going to be coming from a bank, a local bank? So you would be collecting an uncashed check, or you possibly the client might need to wire the funds from another account. Maybe they don't have the money in a local bank, they need to get it from a mainland bank. Whatever the source of the funds are, you're going to need to put it here. If you are doing a wire transfer, you should give your client plenty of time to do that. You don't want to say it right here, wired funds, because then obviously the seller is going to expect that money right away in escrow. So typically a wire could take 1 to 2 days, so you might want to decide to put in this line something like along the lines of wired funds within 3 days of acceptance, something like that, so that your buyer has plenty of time to go to the bank, order the wire, and so on. There have been times I've seen where somebody actually needs to cash out some stock to get the cash to put down. I don't know if that's happened. If that's the case, you would of course need to put that here. But keep in mind that whatever you do put here is something that the seller is going to be looking at. They're going to want to know where that money is coming from and how long it's going to take it to get to escrow. So just keep that in mind. And as you move along down, you're going to put received by. If you're going to be collecting a check, you're going to actually sign this, that you were in receipt of the check. And then obviously your name as the agent would go here where it says agent name. And this area here is self-explanatory. This is all the business information for your company. This is important to a seller agent so that they can get back to you with a response on your offer. So you're going to want to make sure that you put the information on how to get a hold of you here. I've seen people put in the company phone number and nothing else, and then that seller's agent sending you a counter, or maybe wants to accept the offer but has no idea where to send it except by calling our office, and we may not be open on a weekend or something. So make sure you put the proper information here and the best way to get a hold of you. B-2, interest on deposits. Usually in a case like this where the deposit is not a lot, there's no need to collect any interest. It would cost more to set up an interest-bearing account than it would be to collect interest. So the HAR put in this standard term here that unless we specify, they're not going to collect interest for your buyer. If you have a really big client with a huge deposit, let's say it's a $5 million home and he's putting on half down, obviously that might be something that you would consider earning interest on. And if that was the case, then there would be specific procedures for that. So don't worry about that until you have that situation. But of course, if you do come up with that, you're welcome to call myself or Karen and ask what to do in that situation. Okay, so now here we are at the addenda. This would be the section where you would check off all of the addendums that apply to your transaction. And being that this is a sample, usually we will want to attach an as-is condition form, and depending on the year of the home, if it's pre-1978, you need to provide a lead-based paint addendum. And then of course on all of our contracts, we want you as a company, we want you to provide the Elite Pacific Properties addendum, and that itself has its own set of language that we'll cover later. If for some reason your client is not comfortable with our Elite Pacific Properties addendum, and it has happened, and they specifically request that it not be included, I don't think that would be a problem. You would just need to make sure that you let Karen know that your client was the one that specifically requested that it not be included. Sometimes you might have some pretty savvy clients that read the language and they just aren't comfortable with it. But you will have no choice but to add the lead-based paint, because that's by law you would have to do that. And as is condition form, it's not necessary, but by providing it in your offer, some more makes your offer stronger, because you're kind of telling the seller ahead of time, like, don't worry, we know that it's as is, and you can expect us not to ask for anything, but that does not mean that you cannot ask for repairs after the home inspection is done. It just kind of sets a tone with the seller that you are agreeing to take it as is, but if something comes up in the home inspection that's really crazy and you had no clue about, obviously, that's nothing that you could have foresaw. But it's just one of those things that could help make your offer stronger. There are times where you may not want to use the as is in a case of possible, a brand new home. If it's a brand new home, obviously you wouldn't want to insult the seller. Or if the seller has done some absolutely amazing remodel and it's like in tip-top shape, that could be an insult to the seller by providing an as is. So might want to think about your situation. But again, this is a standard, sample and what we would consider doing in a contract. Okay, so moving down. Oh, and by the way, I want to also mention too, by putting the NA in the boxes, you're going to see that throughout the contract. It's kind of a good practice to do by actually filling out all of the boxes with something so that it's not ambiguous or misconstrued or what you might have meant by leaving it blank. At least by putting NA in there, the seller knows that it's not applicable, and there can be no question. So I won't cover that anymore. Just that you'll probably see that throughout the tutorials that we have put that NA in those boxes that would not apply. All right. All right. So moving down to section D, offer to buy and purchase price. So this is a really important part of the contract we got to pay attention to. D1 is the offer to buy. So this can be a very strategic portion of the contract where you want to be careful what you put in here. Like I said, typically you want to give a seller about 2 days to receive the contract, to review it, and to either give you a response or to accept your offer. Now, mind you, you're going to be going through the contract, filling it out, getting it signed by the broker, getting it signed by your client. By the time it reaches the seller's agent's hands, you may be into day 1 of the response period, and then that seller agent needs to get it off to the seller for review. So that 2 days could go by really quickly. So depending on your situation, 2 days is a pretty good standard amount of time, but things to consider would be, where is the seller? Is the seller here? Are they local? Do they live in the house? If they live abroad, like maybe they live on the mainland or possibly another country, you might want to give a few more days because of the time difference, the language barrier, all that. You might want to give a few more days as a courtesy to the seller. Now, having said that, this again is a strategic portion of the contract where you might want to, if let's say for example, you're writing this contract on a Saturday and you know that the seller is going to be having a Sunday open house. You probably know by now that you go to a Sunday open house and the seller agent's showing properties and you can hear them saying, oh yeah, we've got an offer coming in, or we have an offer on the table. You don't want to be that person that they're talking about, because then you've got the seller agent giving up something to other potential buyers that could come in and possibly beat you in bringing in a better offer. It also stimulates activity at the open house. Like if I'm a buyer looking at a property and the agent says to me, oh yeah, we've got an offer coming in, I better hurry up and call my agent to get an offer in. And not only that, but now I'm worried about the pricing. I might need to come in with full price. And let's say your offer is not full price, you've just given the seller agent a reason to stimulate activity at their open house. So if you can kind of understand where I'm going with this, is that when you fill out this date, if you're doing it on a Friday or a Saturday and you know they're having a Sunday open house, you may want to consider giving a short window. Like you're writing this up on a Saturday morning, you may want to give them until Sunday noon. Or maybe you're doing it on a Friday night, you might want to give them until Saturday evening. Something like that, where you're going to get your response from the seller before they even have their open house. But again, things can always backfire, and a thing to consider would be that could really kind of irritate the seller, and in that case, you just kind of gotta weigh your options. But in this market right now, 2014 January, uh, it is a it is a really hot and heavy market with the buyers out there putting in multiple offers and bidding wars and things like that. So you might not have any choice. So that is uh, all the things to consider when filling out this information. The time, it again, it just depends on what time you want to give them until. Usually we put 5 p.m. But if you want to do like a 10 a.m. thing, of course you can do that here too. Okay, so moving on to D2 purchase price. The initial deposit, so from whatever you're going to plug in up here, will automatically fill down here. But now we're going to talk about the additional deposit. So remember we discussed that this is a sample contract based on a $1 million offer price, 20% down, which is $200,000. And how are we going to split up these deposits? So we discussed that the additional deposit, the more you put down, the better your offer. So you want to make it as strong as possible, but again, whatever the buyer is comfortable with. This is a standard. We put in $10,000, but you can obviously put in much more than this. And then the balance would be done at closing. But going back up here to the additional deposit, once you pass, well, a typical time is when the seller's going to wonder, when am I going to get that additional deposit? You need to tell the seller when you're going to be doing that. A typical time to do this additional deposit would be after the buyer accepts the inspection. The inspection is one of the biggest cancellation periods in the contract, and your buyer probably doesn't want to give up any more money until he knows for sure they are going to buy the property. So what we've done here is put in a standard term here, 3 business days from acceptance of J1. J1 is the inspection time period, and that can be anywhere from 7 days to 15 days and that sort of thing. But you want to be able to give your buyer time to provide the additional deposit once they accept the inspection to get it into escrow. You could accept J1 on a Saturday, but there's no way you're going to make it to the bank, make it to escrow with your check on a weekend because escrow is not open. So in that case, that would be pretty difficult for you to do. So we tend to say 3 business days from acceptance because we want to be able to provide days that escrow is open for you to get that in. Plus, it can be pretty stressful for a buyer once they've decided to move forward. Having to hand over the next deposit is kind of psychological. You want to give them some time and make them feel comfortable about things, so give them plenty of time to do that. This is almost never countered, but you don't want to do too many days because that could frustrate a seller. He's going to want to see the money in escrow right away after you accept the inspection. But that's what we would typically put here. Sometimes you might even want to put a date in here, and it's just really up to you and your buyer when you want to provide that. But again, this would be something that, as representing a buyer, we would recommend that you do the deposit after your buyer accepts the inspection period. Then everybody knows you're moving forward. But again, this could also be strategic. If you wanted to make your offer stronger, you can say within 7 days of acceptance of the contract. That way the seller knows that not only are you putting down $5,000, but that you're going to put another $10,000 in a week, and that's even before you accept the inspection period, and that could make your offer stronger. So these are the things to consider. Okay, so now we talk about the total cash funds. So you've got $200,000 total cash funds from the buyer. That would obviously all be in escrow by the time they go in to sign their papers, their closing papers. And then the balance of that, sorry, the balance of the cash funds from the purchase price is where they're going to get the rest of the money. So obviously this is a subject to a mortgage. So we would put in this standard language, a new first mortgage at prevailing rates and terms acceptable to buyer. If you put acceptable to buyer in here, it's a kind of a cancellation provision for the buyer should something happen with the loan that's not acceptable to the buyer. You have an out there with this language. And then of course the total purchase price. There could be some other situations where this balance would be coming from another means, like let's say the buyer needs to sell a home, which is another section in the contract. But if they were maybe doing like an agreement of sale or possibly doing a purchase money mortgage, that type of thing, you would put that information on this line right here. You're probably not going to have those in your beginning stages of your career, but it could happen. And if that does come up, obviously we will help you when you get that type of situation, because they're not really all that common. So if it does happen to you, you'd want to either call myself or Karen, and might be able to have to sit down with you and go over that a little bit more line by line. But this is just a standard, basic filling out of page 2 of the purchase contract. Okay, so that concludes page 2 of the purchase contract, and now you can move on to page 3.